Welcome to Enots Engineering, I'm Alan. In this video we make a special socket spanner that fits the Lathe headstock bearing nut. With this socket you can fit a torque meter to get a reading of the torque applied, and once the correct torque is established you can repeat that torque. This is a finished item. It's a 1/2 inch square hole with a bore and a recess in the back and 4 holes around the perimeter. These 4 holes take small studs that go through, so when you put this onto the nut you can then put a stud in each hole so it grips the nut, and then in the rear you can fit a torque meter to get the torque reading that you're applying to the nut. Now by doing that you can repeat that torque once you've established the correct torque. So that's a finished item. So let's go into the workshop and see how we do it.
Today I want to make a tool that has 4 pins in that fit in the 4 holes on the bearing nut.
Now I should be able to get this in. This is just a piece of metal I've got. Just a hollow. It's some sort of, well, it was a tool for, I think it's putting bearings in or bushes in on a car. Some special tool. But it's ideal stock for making things out of. Just putting the centre drill. The part, the outside's running out to the inside. It's the inside I need to drill out. Just losing my telescopic gauge to get into the bore. That's okay, 34.
I've turned it round, put it back into the 4-jaw chuck, and I'm just facing off the end to remove the cone that was on there.
I'm just setting my tool post drill square, and the way I'm doing that is put the square along the edge of the chuck and come over the flat on the 2 bearings, and just with the tool post loose you can then just square it up, lock the tool post. I've already set the centre height so that when the centre drill is in it's on centre. What I want to do is drill 4 holes on the outside, so I'll use the chuck jaws for the hole positioning, and I need to come in 6.5 millimeters from this edge. So if I bring this in touch the centre drill on the edge, zero my compound slide, go in 6.5mm,
plus half the diameter of the centre drill.
I want to make sure that I don't turn the chuck on, so I'll just turn the power off to the motor. I'm using this block which I used before, which just goes under the chuck jaw, hold it down on there, put the chuck key in just so I can hold that as I centre drill the 4 holes. Now I need a 1/4 inch drill. Now that counterbore is to go over this gear. These holes line up with the holes in a nut, so all I need to do now is make 4 pins that will go through the hole in the spanner into the nut and make a 1/2 inch square drive on the end. Just put a piece of steel in, 3 jaw chuck. I've roughed it out, that's about 12mm diameter. Now I want to take it down to 1/4 inch. Slowly winding the wheels in. Set up the parting up tool, make sure it's square to the part. Just using the square on the chuck.
slacken the 2 grub screws off and fit the new spanner. That fits okay, so the next job is to file the 1/2 inch hole and make it 1/2 inch square.
I've filed a square hole in the back, so now I can fit a socket in there. I've put the pins into the holes, tapped them in. I've put in a 3-jaw chuck. I've held a bar of steel as a lever across the chuck jaws, and now that's loose. I can take this out. There's the nut. That nut does the preload on the bearings in the head. There's one thing I need to point out. If you're taking the nut off the back of the headstock, the 2 grub screws that lock the thread, on the inside there's a brass disc to prevent the thread getting damaged, and that's the finished item. All I did was file a square hole in the back to fit a standard 1/2 inch socket set. I've put some grease in these cap head holes to hold the brass pads in position. It's just to help prevent them falling out. Now we'll start to reassemble this on the lathe. And the brass pieces are still in there. Screwed the grub screws in and then we back them off a little bit so I know they're not interfering with the thread. So I'll put my spanner back on, put the pins back in. So now I'm ready to tighten this up. Got this old torque wrench on the end. So I'll just tighten this up. Now I'm tightening the bearings up. On this end I've just put a bar on a Morse taper that I can grip to move the spindle. I've put a dial indicator touching the chuck register. So now when I bend this bar, you can see I've got about 1/10. Each division on there is 1/10 of a thou, and I'll leave it at that. 10 pound-feet. Take the pins out. And the idea of the head is, if you on top of this pin, is if you get too tight, you've got nothing to grab. So with this, you can just lift it out. Tighten the grub screws up. Doesn't need a lot of pressure on these grub screws. Now before I put it all back together, I'll just run the motor. Okay, I've assembled all the gears together. Let's give it a lot of oil. There's the spanner, 4 pins, square in the top to fit a standard 1/2 inch socket. Oh well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Enots Engineering.